You were going to be a bit shocked by the situation you were in, and I wasn't quite sure how much you were taking in, really.
Did you notice a change in me from pre-sentencing to then, being 6 months or so into a prison sentence? My name is Jacob Dunn. I'm an author, campaigner, and educator in restorative justice. In 2011, I threw a single punch that ended another man's life. And after 14 months in prison, I found myself homeless, unemployed, and struggling to find a sense of purpose. But I managed to get my life back on track. And now I help others do the same. Join me on this first season of Right From Wrong, where I speak to the people who were instrumental in my journey from punishment to redemption. This is Right From Wrong. Welcome back to Right From Wrong. As you may have heard in the previous episode with my friend Akai, it can be easy to fall into the wrong crowd when you're raised in certain environments. It is often normal, expected even, to do bad things and become bad people. Growing up in groups where respect and belonging is earned through fear and intimidation. But anyone who has kids knows that we are not born bad or evil. It's the software that we download as we learn to think and speak. The values we are given. But even then, it's not quite black and white. I had plenty of the right morals and values given to me as a kid, but the wrong ones seemed more fun and attractive as I became a teenager. And impressing your mates becomes more important than praising your mum. My next guest knows all about working with people who hold toxic values and make bad choices. Her name is Wendy, and she was my probation officer all those years ago when my name and manslaughter case came across her desk. She kept a lookout for cases like mine. Wendy knows people on the spectrum or that are neurodivergent. I must have looked like a deer in the headlights when she first met me. She saw me at my most vulnerable, both before and after prison, for different reasons. But eventually, Wendy would receive a referral from a charity called Remedy to see if I would be interested in taking part in restorative justice, to speak with the parents of the man that I killed and answer their questions. So please, welcome Wendy to the show. It has been some journey, hasn't it, Wendy?
Yes.
Thank you so much for coming on the show today and being with me on stage
You're welcome.
The Playhouse. 2011 would have been when you first heard about me, shall we say?
Yeah.
Can you give us a little insight into kind of how that came about?
Yeah, I used to attend a local autism support group because my son is autistic. I think we were approached by a family friend of yours who said that your mum was very concerned. Obviously, it was a serious offence, and they were really worried about how you were going to cope with going through the court process. And so they spoke to me because they knew I was a probation officer, and I went into work and said, I'd really like to pick up this case if I can. And they agreed. So that's how I sort of got your pre-sentence report, essentially.
So what was your first impression when we met?
So when I first met you, well, you were quite young anyway. You were very quiet, quite shy. You just looked in a complete state of shock. I was just trying to sort of explain the process to you because it was your first experience of being in court. So I was trying to sort of prepare you for some of that. I wasn't surprised that you were sort of quite shy. I kind of expected that you were going to be a bit shocked by the situation you were in. And I wasn't quite sure how much you were taking in, really, of what I was saying.
Probably not a lot.
No.
So
and
just like when I was in the courtroom, I was just like...
Yeah. And I think that's why I got you back in, so you could have a look through the report so you knew sort of what more to expect on the day, because it's so daunting, isn't it? And you just looked daunted by the whole process.
What was your recommendations to the judge in my case?
Because you were in court for manslaughter, it would have been a definite custodial sentence. So, yeah, you were definitely going to get a prison sentence of some sort. And obviously we were quite worried that it could have been reasonably lengthy, actually. So because of your age and, your personal sort of circumstances, I was trying to argue to keep the prison sentence at the minimum possible. Because when you're in prison with lots of other young men, as, yeah, it is a bit of a breeding ground. And people make connections and then, they come out and those connections are there. And you're sort of taking a chunk out of somebody's young life, aren't you? And that sort of learning process. So that you're almost starting again when you come out of prison, really, aren't you? So you know that the longer someone spends in custody at that young age, it's going to be more tricky for them to move away from offending behaviour. And we often, as probation officers, we would point that out in the reports, really.
So I was sentenced to 30 months.
Yeah, I was mightily relieved, to be honest, that it was 30 months. So I thought you could potentially be looking at a lot longer than that.
I go into prison and we didn't have masses of contact, but not many probation officers do have that much contact once somebody goes to custody, do they?
No, and that is, that a lot of that is to do with high caseloads, obviously. I think I only came to see you once in Glenparva.
Did you notice a change in me from pre-sentencing to then, being 6 months or so into a prison sentence?
Yeah, I think your sort of demeanour had changed. You were perhaps sort of more into a hard man survival mode. Because you were, obviously, that is not how you presented at all when you first came for your pre-sentence report. So, yeah, you were perhaps a bit more sort of...
I've been going to the gym a little bit more and...
Yeah, I think you were presenting yourself a little bit differently. And that's how you survive in prison, isn't it? Yeah. You've got to have a front, and it wasn't major. Yeah. But, yeah, there was certainly a bit of a change, but I wasn't massively concerned. Any more than I would have been anyway.
For me, getting out was 2012, New Year's Eve.
Yes, I know.
I couldn't believe that.
I know.
When I looked at my release date, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm getting out on New Year's Eve.
I know. So I remember thinking, New Year's Eve, he's just going to go out on the Raz, basically. So I was a bit concerned about that. And I think I wasn't in the office that day, so you had to come and report to someone else. And I was just thinking, just please.
Please, Jacob, don't go too overboard on your first day out.
Yeah, just take it easy. Yeah, I was a bit concerned. And it looked like quite a night by the sounds of things.
Yeah. I came out of prison New Year's Eve. My friends came and picked me up. As you heard in the last episode with Akai, brought me some new clothes and trainers. And we went out for an all-you-can-eat Chinese and then had a big night out. Although I can't remember actually overdoing it. I think I went back to a friend's house and slept on a sofa, and then I came and saw you and said, "Oh, Wendy, what can you remember about that from when you first met me coming out of custody?"
It was just very unsettled, wasn't it? You were sleeping here, there, and everywhere, and you were like, "Oh, I might move to Clifton, or I might move." You just didn't know where you were going to end up. And the problem we have is that we can't sort of refer people for housing really until they're out of custody and the need is kind of there in the moment.
Because I remember just picking up on that. I remember having resettlement team come and see me in prison.
Yeah.
Like a couple of months out before being released. And they were like, "Have you got anywhere to go?" I was like, "No, I'm not moving back in with my mum."
No. Yeah, you were adamant about that. And I could understand why you didn't want to. But yeah, I was worried because I didn't know who sofa you were sleeping on and what they were up to. And so it all felt a bit precarious.
There was probably too many loose ends to kind of...
Yeah, I was just trying to sort of, monitor things really and kind of I was getting you in quite a couple of times a week just to kind of keep an eye on things and trying to get you into some sort of housing and get you on the waiting list and all that kind of stuff. And it was at the Salvation Army or something?
Salvation Army, yeah. I was in the hostel there, eventually.
Yeah.
And then it was just helping me. I remember you helping me with applications to get on the housing banding system for a flat.
I remember you moving into that flat. Trying to get you some furniture and stuff.
Literally had nothing.
No, nothing.
I was just like, what did I have? I had like a couple of deck chairs and like...
I remember coming to that home visit. It was a bit bleak.
There was a charity, I actually remember who they are. I think it was the Trent Vineyard Church.
The Archers.
Yeah. Still doing it, I think.
Yeah. No, they're a really good charity, actually. Because how did you find that bit in between where you literally had nowhere stable?
Yeah.
So that must be I think that's one of the hardest things for people.
It was, I don't know. It was just such a weird time because on the one hand, I was just grateful to be out and be able to like walk around, and just sleep on a sofa and go and see a friend and just be out in the community. And then on the other hand, there's just so much kind of like unknown. You were right to be concerned that I was potentially at risk.
Slipping back
into old ways.
Yeah.
Especially because now I'd been sentenced for manslaughter. People in my neighbourhood wrongly gave me more respect.
Yes. That was my biggest concern, I have to say, because I just felt like, you know, you're just going to be around all the same people. And,
Oh, Jacob, you know.
Yeah.
We've got, you know, they used to say, oh, yes, we've got a killer back in the team. And then you're like, it just makes me cringe now.
I know.
But like back then I was like, I felt like all warm inside and like,
I know.
Everybody, you know, and it's so easy to kind of just get.
Yeah, that was my main concern for quite a while, I think. So I was just trying to sort of have a loose grip on what was happening with you, really.
Yeah, and would you say that period was is generally the most vulnerable for people?
Yeah, I think
it
is. Yeah, because again, it's different for everyone, isn't it? Everyone's got different circumstances, but a lot of people come out and they haven't got a firm address, and I think unless you've got that basic stability, how do you even have a starting point, really?
Yeah.
Just in survival mode.
We are in a very tricky situation.
Yeah.
We are at risk of reoffending and not having much stability.
Yeah.
You helped me find a flat, and we've talked about that and moving in there. So that was the first step of getting one of my basic needs met. And then you get a contact call about this thing called restorative justice.
Yes.
Tell me more about
bizarre.
how that played out.
Yeah, sitting at my desk one afternoon, got this call. And I say, I'd been in probation for 20 odd years and never heard of it. I suppose I always associated it with things like burglary and stuff like that. But I'd never been asked to take part or ask somebody to take part in it. So I was a bit kind of taken aback. I was like, ooh, what's this?
Would you be able to give me a definition of your understanding of restorative justice at that time? And
I mean, I knew very little about it. I sort of knew that it's for victims to kind of have their say and try and get some understanding for the person who's committed the crime against them, I suppose. So David and Joan were the parents of James, your victim, and they had applied to take part in the restorative justice process. And the person who was managing it in their case and your case was Nicola from Remedy. So it was Nicola who I first spoke to. Yeah, so Nicola came with an initial letter from David and Joan and read it out to both of us. And you were just sat kind of, I don't think I was even facing you. I couldn't look at you. You couldn't look at anyone. I couldn't look at you because it was too emotional. So it was that was probably one of the hardest things I did in my entire career as a probation officer, to listen to that letter. It was very open and kind of honest. There was no accusing nature to it. It was just them telling their, traumatic experience of being in the hospital and losing James and having to make that awful decision. So it was really hard to hear. And it had a huge impact. Well, on both of us, clearly. But you would just, very still, very quiet, because I can't even imagine what that was like for you. And I said, look, they just want some questions about what happened that they need answering. And I think we had a bit of a discussion. I was a bit sort of blown away by them asking, really, because I was like, oh, I didn't know that was even possible, really. And my first thought was like, oh, I'm not sure that Jacob's going to manage. My initial fear was that it would be too challenging for you because things were still quite unsettled for you. So I was really concerned for everybody, I suppose. And I was thinking, I can't see how this is going to work.
That you could benefit from speaking to the people or hearing from the people that you've harmed the most, because it just kind of doesn't make sense when you first hear it, does it?
No, I mean, I could sort of see it. I thought it would be, I thought it would be a strange concept for you, which I'm sure it was, because it was a little bit strange for me. No, I sort of understood what the objectives are.
If you said, Jacob, I've had this referral, but I don't think you should do it, none of this would have happened, would it?
And I could easily have done that, to be honest, because I was, and even I think when I first met Nicola, I was like, I'm not sure how he's going to sort of cope with this. So I was still kind of very, So I'm glad, and I think sort of Nicola's persistence perhaps won over in that, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think I've just put it to you on the next appointment. It hadn't occurred to me that you would ever sort of meet them, but I did hope that you would be willing to answer their questions because it felt, that felt the appropriate thing to do, really.
Yeah, and it obviously was important for them as well to ask me
Yeah,
them.
absolutely, yeah. And then you came back and your response was, if they need some questions answering, that it's the least I can do. And I thought, all right, okay, that's fair enough. So I obviously contacted Nicola back and we sort of arranged to meet.
Give it the green light.
Yeah.
Well, because that's the thing, isn't it, about people who are incarcerated in prison? And we want people to be in prison and take responsibility. But the thing I find really difficult is, in order to take responsibility, you need to be remorseful and own your problems. And I think, one really good way of doing that is to appreciate the harm. And it's difficult to just imagine the harm you have unless you hear it from the horse's mouth.
Yeah.
And that's what I did in that moment with you. I didn't know what I was letting myself in for when I said, yes, it's the least I can do to agree to take part.
Yeah.
But then when Nicola rocked up with that letter, it wasn't, as you say, it wasn't about Jacob, you're a monster. And
there was none of that, was there? There was none of that.
No, it was just expressing the harm, being honest.
Yeah.
And
That's
then
what they
asking
needed
the questions.
to say, isn't it? It's what they needed to say, and then they asked the questions. They asked the questions at the end of that letter. Did you answer the questions that day? I can't remember.
I believe so, yes.
Yeah.
And then Nicola went back and
that's right. Fed back to them.
Spoke with them. And then what did you, after that meeting, did you see a change in me or? So
I wouldn't say necessarily. I think you were just in a state of shock after that first meeting. I think there were a few more meetings and I think, things were a bit more settled for you then, certainly than what they had been. So them asking about what you were planning to do. And that is the moment I remember as just the shock on your face, really. And like, why are they interested in what I'm going to do, given, everything? You were so puzzled by that question. And I think it took a while for you to sort of process why they would even be asking you that. That's the moment when I think things that was the catalyst, I think, for then things progressing in the way they did.
And I said, Wendy, I want to try education again.
Yes. And I was like, great.
There you go. Right here, I think you helped me with the referral because I had to go through loads of screening at the college to assess whether I was going to be a risk around other students.
Yeah. And we have to do that as a matter of course, obviously. Yeah. And I was never concerned about your risk. So I didn't have any concerns in terms of you going into colleges and stuff.
And what would you say your thoughts are on restorative justice now? You're heading back into probation.
I am.
You might get the odd referral.
Yeah, I hope so. Well, I spoke to Nicola, who's from the Restorative Justice, who obviously worked with you on that process. And I spoke to her the other night, and she said that they've just won the contract for Nottingham, which is amazing. I never thought that would happen, to be honest, because there was nothing in Nottingham when I was around. Nicola used to come from Sheffield. So, I think that's really good news. She says they're struggling for referrals, so I'm going to be in there pushing for referrals. Because, and there isn't a better example than this, is there really?
No.
And this has got to be one of the more complex situations that you would try doing restorative justice in, really. So there's lots of other scenarios where it perhaps would be a bit more straightforward. And I think it's a really positive thing.
We're sat here on a stage in the Nottingham Playhouse where your character is portrayed on stage and mine, from what we've just talked about today, from, pre-sentencing and going to prison. And, we never would have expected.
Not in a million years. It's quite surreal, isn't it, really? Probably for both of us. I mean, I said that to you before. I mean, who would have thought? Who would have thought? I never would have thought you would get to meet David and Joan. I never imagined that you would sort of reach this stage and the whole sort of story, really. Very bizarre experience seeing myself. There were definitely some elements of me in there, undoubtedly. Really interesting seeing you portrayed. Is it David?
Yes. But just so the audience knows, David Shields
Yes.
is the actor who plays
Yeah.
Jacob in the play Punch.
And he portrays you perfectly. The voice, the accent, the mannerisms and expressions. I was and I sort of watched him carefully as I watched it 2 nights running, I watched him quite carefully. And astonishing really what he's managed to sort of achieve. It's like he inhabits you through all of those stages. But yeah, sitting here in the Meadows.
Yeah, we're here in the Meadows. It's now on the stage.
Yeah, it's phenomenal.
And hopefully, it stimulates more conversations like these and about, important issues.
I hope so.
Around, and shines an example that, if you put your best foot forward and you try to take responsibility and apply yourself, even if you have got ADHD, even if you have got all these other issues and problems, with the right support and the right opportunities, you can go a long way.
Absolutely.
So, Wendy, as we've discussed, you entered my life at a very vulnerable moment in time and a big period of transition, going into prison and then coming out of prison and then transitioning into taking part in restorative justice. How would you kind of summarise my journey through those transitions to where we are today?
Oh, yeah. Well, I think you went from a very young, vulnerable person who was very sort of confused about what had happened and how things had got to that sort of horrendous point, really. And I think that's where you were at when I first met you. As I say, saw you only briefly in custody, and you had a little bit more, I wouldn't say swagger exactly, but you were certainly putting on a front, which is natural for survival when you're in prison. And then, when you came out, I think you were doing okay, I say, for how chaotic it was. And it did feel quite chaotic for quite a few weeks. But I think you managed that sort of better than I expected. I think, I was just worried, obviously, that you were going to just slip straight back into where you were. But you were sort of, even in amongst the chaos, I think you were struggling to try and get some stability. So when you did get some housing, I think things started to get a bit better for you. And then obviously the transformation through that process, really, of meeting with Nicola and going through all of that and getting back into education. And obviously I sort of disappeared at that point. So I haven't sort of seen you face to face for a very long time. Yeah, I mean, I still recognise the person you were then, but it's like a complete transformation, really, isn't it? I guess some of me must have sort of recognised that in you at that stage, really, because I think that's why I kind of fought so hard for you, really, because I could see the potential, I suppose, in amongst all that sort of chaos that was happening, and you were sort of struggling to find your way through, and actually how many people would have responded really in that way to that restorative justice process in those very difficult circumstances. So I was always sort of impressed with how you managed all of those very difficult situations, and and obviously everything you've achieved since. And I've read the book, obviously, I've seen the play, and what can I say? It's almost a complete transformation, but I still see the Jacob that you were then, and you just, grown up an awful lot, obviously, and you've done a lot of soul searching, and you've transformed into the person you are today. And it's a lifelong struggle, isn't it? Becoming who you want to be for all of us, but especially for someone in your situation. So
Exactly. It's always a work in progress.
Always. If you could get through that, I guess you could get through anything, really. Pick yourself up, keep moving.
That's it. It's been a pleasure having you on, Wendy. It's been a beautiful moment to share with you, and good luck going back into probation.
Thank you.
And thank you so much, Wendy, for being part of that journey.
You're welcome.
Next week, I'll be talking to Joan and Nicola, the mother of my victim and facilitator of the restorative justice process, which brought us together. Be sure to give it a listen. In season 2 and beyond, it is super important for me to make sure I deliver a podcast that brings you the most value possible. And so I need your help. So if you could hit subscribe and follow, I'd really appreciate it.